Well, it got us going.
Yeah, and many people found it very valuable. I mean, it's just to either to my advantage or your advantage. People found it valuable. They heard some heard what they wanted to hear in it, and some had their minds bent around as was intended. But many people certainly felt it was a kind of failed experiment in conversation, and we should try it again. And then we had a much more amicable discussion on my podcast, and that planted the seed for these public events. If memory serves, we had one event booked in Vancouver, and you were still not quite the famous Jordan Peterson yet. And then in the 15 days it took us to actually get to that event, your star had risen so quickly that we recognized that, the promoter recognized that we had to book another event immediately. By the time we got to London and Dublin, we had these immense audiences that were segmented in ways that I had never quite experienced. I've been in front of, my home team audience, and I've been in front of a hostile audience, but I've never been in front of an audience where, fully 50% or 60-40. I don't know what the split was at that point, but, thousands of people were on one team and thousands of people were on another team for questions of God and faith and meaning. And
yeah, but everybody was on board for the discussion. You remember one thing that happened, this was in Vancouver. We were going to switch to a Q&A, and we asked the audience essentially if they wanted the discussion to continue because we were in the middle of it, or if they wanted to switch to the Q&A, and there was overwhelming support in the audience for the discussion to continue, which I thought was quite remarkable.
Yeah. So it was a lot of fun, and there was just a tremendous amount of energy. To have 8,000 or 9,000 people show up for an intellectual discussion, really. It did have the character somewhat of a debate, but it was not framed as anything like a formal debate. And we were really just having a conversation and agreeing where we agreed and disagreeing where we disagreed. And it was, anyway, I found it to be a lot of fun. And
it was ridiculously exciting.
Yeah, and people loved it. So yeah,
Yes, and so what do you make of that? It's like, why in the world was what it was that we were talking about attractive to so many thousands of people?
Well, when you look at the full sweep of what we cover, in those particular conversations, we weren't focusing on areas that we agree about much more. You and I, if you're going to turn us loose on questions of, moral panic around identity politics and social justice hysteria, you and I will agree, I think, probably 90% or more on many of those topics. And I don't recall us touching any of that, but that was in the background. It was certainly the wind in your sails, making you more and more prominent at that point because you had hit those topics so hard. But the topics we were touching, questions of what is reality and how we should live within it, really, the fundamental questions of what it means to live a good life, what are the requisites for living a good life, how should we think about our place in the universe so as to have the best chance of living a good life. These are the most important questions anyone ever asks, provided they have sufficient freedom to even worry about such things, right? If the wolf is at the door or in the room, well, then people really, for the most part, don't have the luxury of worrying about whether they're as ethical or as honest or as profoundly engaged with the present moment as they might be. But once you get to something like, first world concerns where you have enough material abundance where your, survival is not a question, and when political stability is sufficient that you're not continually worried that your neighbors are going to murder you, then when you wake up at 3 a.m. and can't get back to sleep, you're thinking about what does this all mean, and what is a good life?
One of the things that we did agree on, I think, that sort of provided a container for the discussions in total, was that there was potentially such a thing as the good life, that's just not some, epiphenomenal abstraction or something like that, but something central. And to some degree, I think we disagreed about where the information for deriving what might constitute the good life comes from. But it isn't even clear to me exactly where those differences lie. And that was part of, I suppose, the fun of the discussion, and something that I also hope to continue today, because I've seen since then, it seems to me that you've turned your attention more and more, perhaps not more and more, but you've certainly continued your route into investigation of what constitutes the good life.